So last week we started this contrast that the author of Hebrews was giving between this old way that there was access with God with through the Mosaic law and just how scary and that was, and then this new way that we have access to God and how we meet with Him, and that it's a lot. There's a lot of differences. And again, this is all going with this main theme that Jesus is better. So the author is pointing out how our access to God now is much better through Jesus than it was through the Mosaic law. So let's we're gonna back up just so we read this so we have some context, and then we will get into verse 22, which we started a little bit last week, but we'll get through some more. Dad, would you mind reading verses 8? We're in Hebrews 12, verses 18 through 22.
18 through 22.
I'm sorry, 18 through 24. Two more verses.
What verses, John?
18 through 24.
18 through 24. Oh, boy. For we are not come unto the mount that might be touched, and that burned with fire, nor unto the blackness and darkness and tempest, and the sound of the trumpet and the voice of the words, which the voice they that heard entreated that the words should not be spoken to them any more. For they could not endure that which was commanded. And if so, such as a beast touch the mountain, it shall be stoned, or thrust through with a dart. And so terrible was the sight that Moses said, I exceedingly fear and quake. But ye are come unto the mount, Simon, unto the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels, the great assembly and church of the firstborn, which are written in heaven, and to God the judge of all, and to the spirits of just men made perfect, and Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of speaking, and the blood of sprinkling that speaketh better things than that of Abel.
All right. So we covered verses 18 through 21 last week and a little bit of 22. So we're going to continue 22 and just so we're all on the same page. Verses 18 through 21. This is talking about that time in Exodus when God met with man, kind of the first time, and he met with the Israelites, and there was a lot of warnings. He came down to Mount Sinai, the earth shook, there was fire, there was smoke. It was a crazy thing. And God even told the Israelites, don't look too intently in the cloud on the Lord, or you might die. And they were given lots of other rules, like they had to prepare themselves for 3 days before they could come to the presence of the Lord. They weren't allowed to touch the mountain. No animal was allowed to touch the mountain. There's a whole lot of things that they had to be aware of, that they had to prepare themselves before they could enter into this presence of the Lord. And this was and although it was a scary thing, it was also meant to be this good thing because it was a time when God was going to meet with the children of Israel and communicate with them and talk with them and tell them what his desire is for them. But it was really scary. So scary that the Israelites ended up saying, this is too scary for us. We don't like this. So, Moses, we want you to go talk with God, and then you tell us what God is saying. That way, we don't have to go through all this scary stuff. And so that kind of set up what was going to happen in the future with the children of Israel, that they never met directly with God. They always had this mediator that was this intercessor, this person who was a go-between, because it was just so terrifying to come into the presence of the Lord. And then we contrast that with verse 22 in this section, which talks about now how we have Jesus and how this has kind of changed some. And it's very cool. We talked a little bit about how it says, but you have come to Mount Zion and to that city of the living God. And before what did happen is God descended onto earth and they met God on Mount Sinai. But now the author is pointing out that we ascend now to Mount Sinai into heaven and meet with God there. So there's a better thing already in the fact that how we access God. Instead of God coming to meet with us, we get to go meet with him and be there. And then it's called the city. What is it? The city of the living God. We get to go into the city of the living God, into his presence where he dwells. So there's already this big shift and this big change. And then it says, but you have come to the Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels. And we talked a little bit last week about how there's an innumerable company of angels there in this city. So the idea that we're supposed to catch here is that Zion is huge. The city of the living God is very, very large. So large that they're not only a lot of angels, they're innumerable angels, a great number, a myriad. I think myriad is close to the Greek of that actual word that it says. A myriad of angels, just lots and lots of them. And if you think about some of the things we've seen about angels, it's pretty interesting. Some of them are quite large, some of them are quite scary and they have their own presence. And then imagine you're going into a city with a whole bunch of that. And so I think that this is interesting, but again, it's just pointing out how large the city of God is and how full of life it is. There's things going on. It's not like this barren mountain of Sinai where it's all being consumed and burnt up and everything. Instead, this is a city where there's lots going on. Now, the author mentions here that there's three types of inhabitants of the city of heaven, the city of Zion, which I think is really interesting. So I want to take a few minutes just to talk about that. It says, let me just read verse 22 and 23. It says, but you have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn who are registered in heaven. So we see, first of all, these three types of inhabitants. He's going to add some more on there, but those are strictly, well, we'll talk about that later. But we talk about these three. There's um, the innumerable church, I'm sorry, the innumerable company of angels, the general assembly, and the church of the firstborn. What do you think is this assembly, this general assembly, and church of the firstborn? Do you think those are the same thing or different thing? What do you think about this general assembly? I'm pretty sure I know what the church is, but what do you think about the assembly? Any thoughts on what that could be?
I would maybe the people that were there before Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, right? If we look at this book, again, it's authored to the Hebrews. So there is a large Jewish audience that he's talking to. So maybe this is the group of people that have come into heaven before the church was birthed, right? But it's just interesting to me that the author mentions these two groups, the General Assembly and and Church of the Firstborn. Any other thoughts of what it could be? Think maybe this is just
Because
the
wouldn't they
people
lie in
before.
wait? There were
What's
those
that?
that had died before that had
Yeah.
faith, but Jesus hadn't come yet. And so they were kind of lying in wait. And then when it comes, those that were waiting, they get to go up as well. Yeah.
I think you're probably right. Yeah. But I'm just curious if anybody has any other thoughts about this. It's interesting. Do we think that these are two different groups of people? Are they the same? Is the General Assembly and the church, they're here's the thing. They're all followers of Yahweh. They're all followers of God. It's just if we're taking your approach, John, then these ones they still put their trust in the Messiah. That the Messiah just hadn't come yet. And then we have this second group who's after the Messiah. So I'm just curious on what you guys think. Are these when we talk about the church, when we talk about the people of God, do we include both groups? Or are we just talking about one group? Or what do we think about this?
Maybe it's just not something that we can put our hands on, because distance, space, and time and everything that we judge the world and size by mean nothing to God. And so there's that group that when Christ died on the cross, he descended and he freed them. And that group, maybe the second group that they're talking about, I don't know. But I've never even thought about it before, John, but I get the feeling that it's gonna be, when we get to heaven, it's gonna be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I never thought of it that way. Maybe beyond my understanding.
Yeah.
Or
Almost,
maybe you can figure it out, but it's beyond my understanding.
it's almost the
I,
people in the First Testament and then the people in the Second Testament.
yeah. And then is there any overlap? There's some weird things like, what about Lazarus? Where does Lazarus fit in? He died before Jesus was resurrected, and he died after Jesus was resurrected. So does he get put in the General Assembly, or does he get put in the Church of the Firstborn?
I'm reading other translations and it doesn't seem to, and I don't know if that's the right translation because obviously people choose to translate differently, but you get the sense that it's the same because they don't. It's sort of a, you add the preposition and in the King James,
Yeah.
it sounds like it's two different things, but in other translations seems to meld it all together. But it's an interesting question
It's
nonetheless. I just I have no idea.
it,
I
and you're
got a
right. And I did
strong
look at
feeling.
others. It's not clear. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead,
Well, I got a strong feeling that Lazarus doesn't care what group he's in. He's
Dad.
glad to be there.
Yeah.
That is probably true, right? Everybody's in the group. They're happy with what's going on. They're happy to be in heaven there in the presence of God. I think you're probably right. It's interesting just the way the author worded this, and I wasn't. I'm not sure if this is two different groups or one group, or even if there is such thing as two different groups or one group. Maybe God sees them all as part of the same group, or maybe there are different ways of looking at this. I'm not sure. It's interesting. Go ahead.
If you look at the Old Testament, whenever they gathered the Jews together, they would call a general assembly. And we are called the church. So I believe it is the Old Testament and the New Testament coming together because the Jews would call a general assembly for all believers to come together and then they would worship God. So I think it's Old Testament, New Testament.
Yeah. And this would be exciting for the audience that this author is writing to hear, right? To know that both followers of the law and followers of Jesus, and I say followers of the law, but that's not the right way of saying it. Those who are under the law and followers of Yahweh and followers of Yeshua, they're all here in the same place, in the presence of God, experiencing the same thing. So it's not like uh, those people of the law were cast away and they aren't part of what's going on. They're still here. They're still part of the city of the living God. All right. So it just gets better. So we're just gonna have to keep reading. So it says where are we at? Verse 23, to the firstborn who are registered in heaven. And so this is pretty cool. They're registered in heaven, and there's a lot of uh, there's some points that I think are important here. That one, if they're registered in heaven, one thing that has to be really clear is that everybody who's in heaven, God is 100% aware of. Nobody sneaks in, nobody just misses it. Everybody's God knows exactly where they're at because they're registered. They have a place saved for them, and it's not like you're gonna die and you're gonna go up to heaven and God's gonna say, or some angel's gonna say, "Sorry, we're full. There's no room for you." It's a big city. There's a lot of angels. Some of them took up too much room, right? It's not gonna be like that. It's gonna be, "Oh wait, I see you're registered, so you get to come in." And then at the same time, it's going to be, oh, you're not registered. I'm sorry, you don't get to come in. But the point here is that there's a place saved for us, and God's fully aware of it. And it's pretty cool that we can call ourselves registered in this heavenly place with God. Even now, wherever we're at right now, God's already got a place planned for you. He's got a place set up. He's already said, okay, John, you get to be over in this part of the city. This is where you're going to be. We got a place specially set for you. And it just talks about how God thinks about us, right? Because he's not just like, okay, you said the prayer, you're following me, you get to come in. It isn't just that. It is, you get to come right into the spot that I made ready for you. So it's pretty cool how much he thinks of us, that he's even preparing a place for us individually, right? Because it's not, I think that's the big point we want to take about. This is individual. This isn't corporate. We talked about the company, the General Assembly. We talked about the Church of the Firstborn, and that's as a group corporately, but also individually we're registered. So it's pretty cool. All right, let's see. And then there's another person who's going to be there. That's super important, but also important to understand his role. And that's what the next part says. So it says the church of the firstborn who are registered in heaven. And then it says, to God, the judge of all. So this is the main point, right? That God is in this heavenly city. It's his heavenly city. We get to be with him. But notice that his role here is judge of all. And meeting a judge can be both terrifying, and it can be there can be some security in that. It really depends on which side you're at, right? If you come to the judge and you're the guilty party and you're the one that's going to have judgment against you, then that's pretty scary. You don't want to come up to the judge. You want to postpone that as long as possible. And you can actually see that in a lot of legal cases where somebody's they're in trouble, and maybe they even get convicted, but they still have to have the sentencing, and they'll just keep postponing it, and they'll throw up all of these reasons why they have to keep postponing it because they don't want to come to the judge to get that sentencing part. But then, if you're not the guilty party, if you're the one someone was guilty against, then maybe there's security there because you're like, I'm coming to the judge and I want him to pass judgment on this other person so that I know that there's been some reconciliation or redemption or whatever word you want to use in that sense. So it's just interesting that he's called here, the title is the judge of all. And so there's still part of this fear that we need to have when we come into his presence. We saw in the Old Testament, in that old section that there was a lot of fear when they were coming into the presence of God. Here, we're coming into the presence of God in a completely different manner, but still have to recognize that he's still the judge of all. What do you guys think about him being the judge? Is that scary? Is that encouraging? Is that a little bit of both? You're excited still? What do you guys think?
I think it's great because he knows everything.
Yeah.
It's not like he's got some tainted view or doesn't know the whole story. He knows your thoughts. He knows your motivations.
Yeah.
And
I'm not sure if that makes it more scary or not, though.
I think
but
makes it,
I understand with you.
yeah, it makes it fair. I think it makes it fair.
Well, as long as he sees me as Jesus, I'm okay. If he
Yeah,
sees me
that's
as
exactly
Jesus, then
right.
I got problems.
Absolutely right.
That's
And we're going to get to
that's
that
probably
in this list. But go ahead.
that's probably the scary part is because we know that we're not worthy. And he's
Mhm.
the judge. And so we know we're guilty, but he sees us through Christ. And that's what it says in there.
Yeah.
It's through that lens of Christ on the cross that we are seen. And it's to me,
Amen.
it's a scary part, and it's also the gratifying part.
I mean, fear and reverence gives a different sense to a relationship. I mean, there's different types of relationships we have with people that are valuable, and they're, but they're different. I mean, friends, you don't come in, I don't go to lunch with John in fear and awe of who
What?
you are. And that's okay because we
Uh-uh.
don't need to be in that kind of relationship, and neither should you cause that in me, But yet there's a reverence, and I don't think we get the sense yet. We only get, I mean, we obviously don't get the full sense. We get a
Yeah.
sense of being in the presence of what we might want to call greatness in some capacity. And there is this sense of awe and reverence and to a degree fear, but yet honored that you're in the presence of someone greater than you. And that's actually, like you said, it's a privilege that you just acknowledge, recognizing who you are and what a privilege it is to be invited into maybe, this person. And I know that's a very huge limitation because people, you can only get so far with fear and reverence because next day you find out they did this and then it might be gone, but
Yeah. Yeah.
God himself would be different. And I think there's an appreciation, um, you know, and a reverence and fear of God that's healthy that should never be removed. Because I think I think you're right about there's a comfort level, there's a confidence, there's a there's something there that can only be done because that can only be felt and sensed and enjoyed because someone there much greater than you is there and they've invited you into his presence. And I think that's special on its own. It's not the same as going to coffee with a friend because I don't think we can
Yeah.
ever relate to God that way in that sense. Well, I
And
guess
I think
take
you
that
bring up
back.
a
I
good
don't
point.
know.
We're not.
Jesus called us friends, but this is sort of a really interesting dynamic in that sense. So
He also said, "You're my friends if you do whatever I command." So it's a different type of friendship than what we have with each other. But
You
but it's
know,
a good point. Oh, go ahead, Doug.
yeah, thinking it on my perspective, as a person, right? Think of, we're kind of like slaves, right? I mean, it's all over the Bible, but we're slaves to ourselves, right? I mean, we've got our, quote, privacy, private lives, and there are things we don't share, you know what I mean, with others, you know what I mean? And it depends on what levels of friends. But when you go into this, when we go to this place, there, we don't have any of that. There's none of that. So look at all the time that we spend maybe trying to protect or to guard or to, you know what I mean? That's all gone because God knows everything. I mean, you think of Jesus, right, with the woman at the well, and he goes, "Oh, why don't you bring your husband?" "Well, I don't have one." He goes, "No, you don't. You had five or six, and you know what I mean. And you're living with a guy now. They know. God knows everything. There's zero hidden. So I think there's going to be some liberation on our part. There's going to be some freedom, just not having to think about it, which, I think we don't think, we just automatically are wired like that. But with God, there's, those barriers are gone. So, he sees us 100%. And, we've got to just submit, and I think we will. I mean, we'll be on our knees, right, with everybody else praising and worshiping.
You guys are all out. This is all great, right? This is fantastic. It's just one more thing that I want to point out here, which we've hit, but I just want to make sure we got it because we're going to move on to the next thing, which is really cool, which is that although we have access to God in a new and better way, there's still that element that God is God and he is almighty and all powerful and able to do whatever he desires. And so there's still this aspect that he is judge of all, and we still have to come and approach him in that way, recognizing who he is. There still needs to be some fear and reverence and some of these other words that we can use to describe it when we come approach him, even though he's given us a better and greater access through Jesus. But here's the antidote for all this, and that's the next part. And it says, so I'm just going to read what we read here a little bit again, and then add the next part. To God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of just men made perfect. And so here's the cool aspect of it. We do have to still come to God recognizing he's the judge of all, but at the same time, what's cool here is that he's taken us and made us perfect. And so that we have the ability to come into his presence without being immediately destroyed, without having this aspect, okay, God's going to judge us and condemn you and destroy you right now because he has made us perfect. And notice it's not that we made ourselves perfect. It is that he has made us perfect. And so this is all great. This is the key, and this is the important part of how Jesus is better, is that he has made us perfect so that we can enter into this city of heaven, this city of God, and see all of these crazy, amazing things, be in his presence, still have some fear and reverence of him, but also some confidence that we're not going to be destroyed because of what Jesus has done. So it's all amazing, fantastic things.
And it's of spirits of just men made perfect, right? Not just you still have to have some moral, follow the law. Well, not necessarily the law, but follow Christ and have some kind of moral righteousness. Yes, you can't just go out being some kind of heathen deviant.
It's not to everyone. You're absolutely right. It is limited to the just man. And just so we're clear, what God says is just. If you look at Habakkuk, what we read earlier, he said, the just shall live by faith. So it's those who put their trust in Jesus, in the Messiah, they're the ones who are considered just, the ones who put their trust in him. So it's a great point. It's not open to everyone. And if you go into this place and you're not just and you're not made perfect, then that's where you're in a lot of trouble.
Well, that just is another way to grow that faith, knowing that if you keep it, there is a place for you. And that confidence and comfort in knowing that there is a seat with your name on it. It's not the first day of prison where you're walking in wondering where you're going to eat, or a Southwest flight where you're like Mr. Williams and you're in the D group because you get there late all the time and you don't know where you're going to go, right? There's a place for you. And I love that. I love that. I can't get that out of my head.
Yeah, I agree. This is wonderful. All right. Now, the second most important part. We've had the first important part, which was God, the judge of all. He's going to be there. But also, it says in verse 24, to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of the sprinkling that speaks better things than that of Abel. So again, we're pointing out that Jesus is also there. And this is an important thing to recognize. Jesus is in heaven, in that godly city, in that city of God right now. That's what we're told. He is there right now. And even when he leaves and comes back to earth to do what he needs to do, what's going to happen is there's going to be a shift and a change where that city of Jerusalem is going to come to earth and follow him down there. So he's still going to be in that city with God. So it's great to know, but it's also great to know that we have Jesus as our mediator, which is different than what they had in Exodus. In Exodus, they had Moses as their mediator. And Jesus is so much better a mediator than Moses, not because Moses was bad and terrible, but the problem with Moses was he was man. And what the cool thing about Jesus is he is also man, but he is also God. He's the mediator that actually understands both sides simultaneously because he exists as both man and God. And so he's got this great thing set up. And so we have to recognize that Jesus is in heaven, but there's a really other important aspect that we have to realize about this too, which is Jesus is alive and in heaven. And that's a really important part to understand. He didn't die and stay dead, and then, we can have these thoughts where he spiritually went to heaven. That's not what happened with Jesus. He died, he rose from the dead, he's fully alive, and then he goes to be with the Father. He actually stays here, right, on earth for 40 days. Then he goes to be with the Father. He's alive. So it's not like we have a dead mediator. We have a living mediator who's both God and man and has this ability to intercede for us in a way like no other person can. So this is great and fantastic news. Any comments before we move on to this next part about the sprinkling of blood?
I was just thinking about how much better Jesus is than everything. And I was thinking, I was just thinking about those BC comics when I was thinking about what's good, but what would be better, right? And the wheels are good. And I was thinking about the guy in the BC comic riding around on the one wheel. But then two wheels would be better, but you get four wheels, you go faster and can carry more things. And so it just popped into my head for some reason that doesn't get better than Jesus, man.
Yeah. So is 6 wheels better than 4 wheels?
If it's on a dually, yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, but
We're
we're
on the
gonna
same
be
page.
alive too, John. That's,
What
I mean,
what did you say? I'm
we're
sorry, I
gonna
missed
be
it.
alive too. I mean, Jesus is alive, but we're gonna
Yeah.
be alive too. I mean, that's,
Yeah. And
I think,
to be clear, we're going to be fully alive, right? It's not like we are
Yeah.
dead and we're just a spiritual being that's there. It's going to be more alive than what we are now. What were you gonna say, Sean?
just
the important thing is that, it says we're gonna be made perfect.
Yeah.
Moses wasn't perfect. We aren't perfect, but we will be made perfect through Christ. And I
Mhm.
think that's the more than alive part.
Amen. Yeah, and we talked a little bit about this. I think it was last week or the week before, how there's a spiritual side to it and there's a physical side to it, but we don't have to worry about any of that here. This is going to be all sides to everything. We're going to be made perfect. So whatever that entails, that's where we're going to be. So that's great. And also it's worth pointing out we're going to all be made perfect, but I don't get the sense we're going to be all made exactly the same. We're going to all be made perfectly us. So that's also pretty cool.
Yeah, but it's with the 6-pack abs and full head of hair and all that
See,
stuff.
you might have 6. I think I'm gonna have 8. 8 is better than 6. All right. I don't know what you use those extra 2 muscles for, but that's okay. So let's go on to the next part. It says, "To Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of the sprinkling that speaks better things than that of Abel." So we have this picture here of the sprinkling of blood. And this is something we want to catch because it's tying us in with this Old Testament picture as well as the New Testament. And it's just pointing out that the Old Testament, there was pictures and there was things that were happening that were showing us what it was going to be like. But this reality is better because this is what it all really is, all truly is. The sprinkling of blood talks about the fact that there is this blood that is sprinkled on the ark, and it covers the sin of the people. It covers that sin so they can come into the presence, so they can have that access to God. But then notice the author also says it speaks better things than Abel, and this is really important. So let's jump real quick to Genesis chapter 4, and we're going to take a look at this Abel. It's not much; it'll be pretty quick, but this is pretty cool that we want to make sure we catch here. So this is Genesis chapter 4, and I'm going to read verses 10 through 12. And it says, so this is after Abel has died, and he's talking to Cain, and he said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. So now you are cursed from the earth, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. A fugitive and a vagabond, you shall be on the earth." So here we have this picture here of Cain. He's killed his brother. His brother's blood is on the ground, and the ground, we're told, it cries out to me from his blood cries out to me from the ground. And the interesting thing is, what do you think that is crying out? What do you think that's crying out to God? What is he supposed to do with this?
Justice,
Yeah.
or you know, yeah, because what he did was wrong. So it's crying out to God for justice and
Or something like that, right?
vengeance or something
Justice,
like that.
vengeance, or redemption, or
Yeah.
something. And what we see the result of that blood crying out is that Cain is cursed, and he's told that he when he goes and tries to grow things, it's not going to grow, and he's going to be a wanderer for the rest of his life, trying to, because of what he did and because of what's happened and the blood crying out. And so here's this picture that the author is bringing up. There's this blood that can be poured out on the ground, and the result is it cries out for justice. It cries out for vengeance. But notice that there's a difference here between that and the blood that's poured out on from Jesus. The blood that's poured out from Jesus isn't crying out for justice and vengeance in the same way where it is supposed to be justice and vengeance on us. Instead, it is a form of redemption where he says the justice has already been paid, and now that blood cries out that we are righteous because we are covered in that blood because the vengeance was already poured out. So there's this great picture here of how the blood of Jesus sprinkled out is so much better than blood of others who may have been killed and slain. And theirs, where their blood killing or their blood being shed cries out for justice, and Jesus's blood cries out that justice was paid. So it's just a cool picture. I don't know what do you guys think about this?
Yeah, Jesus, it's like his blood was spilled willingly. All these other scenarios, the blood is spilled unwillingly, right? I mean, that's right. I mean, he did it, it happened purposely for us, right? And for salvation, where people that are killed and murdered, whatever, it's not, it's killed for, there's a totally different motive that's not the individual that lost his blood, right?
Yep.
I think along the same thinking is the others that's blood were spilled were killed and made weak, whereas Jesus, as his blood was spilled, was made strong.
Yeah,
It fits in with John chapter, 1 John 1:7. And it says, but if we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another. And the blood of Jesus Christ, his son, cleanses us from all sin.
And this is the key to being able to come into the presence of the Lord in this place, in the heavenly city. If you're not covered in the blood of Jesus, if he hasn't paid for you individually, you don't get to come. And again, this is individually. Corporately, there's a group that get to come, but still, this is individual to each person. And we're that group because it's individual. But it's just important to understand he has to cover our sin. We have to come to him. We have to ask for our forgiveness and do these things, but we don't get to do it for other people. Every single person has to do this individually, or they might end up in the presence of God without this, and that would be terrible. Then they're going to see him as the judge of all.
Just to comment on John, that's great, that Jesus is made strong. And it's kind of like, I think that, in those moments where we do the will of God in our lives, we're made stronger, right?
Sure.
You know what I mean? That's super cool. I mean, when we're being obedient, and locked in, I always feel more in tune with God, and I feel stronger, in the spirit. So that's a great point, John.
All right. So now we're going to move on to this next section. We got 15 minutes. Let's see. We can do some of it. Verse 25. Let's see. Yeah, let's do verse 25. John, would you mind reading verse 25?
Yes, sir. Mine's titled The Unmovable Kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
25. See that ye refuse not him that speaketh. For if they escape not who refused him that spake on earth, much more shall not we escape, if we turn away from him that speaketh from heaven.
All right, so again, he's the author's pointing out, don't refuse the one who speaks. And we saw again in the Old Testament, there was, in some sense, there was kind of an attempt to do that. And they're like, okay, we're not liking this, is just too scary. And so they put a mediator in there, but they're still hearing him who speaks. They're just hearing it through Moses. And so the point here also is that if they're going to hear God when he speaks through another person, how much better is it when we hear God when he speaks through God, through Jesus, who is also God? And so there's this other point that we don't have to have this mediator that where there's God in heaven and he comes to earth and he speaks to somebody and then that speaks to us. Instead, we get to hear from through heaven in itself because Jesus is still there in heaven. So we get to have access to God again in just a completely different and better way than what you would have back there in the time of Egypt. So this is I'm sorry, right after Egypt, in Exodus. And so instead of Moses being the mouthpiece of God here, the reminder here is that we have Jesus, who is the mouthpiece of God, and he is better. He is speaking to us from heaven, not speaking to us from earth, because that's where he's at. He's with God. And then we're going to read real quick this next section, which I really enjoy. I don't know that we're going to get through all of it, but it's really cool. So let's read verses 26 through 29. Anybody up for reading 26 through 29? I think I called on most. Go ahead, John.
Finish it up. Excuse me. Whose voice then shook the earth. But now he hath promised, saying, Yet once more I shake not the earth only, but also heaven. And this word, yet once more, signifieth the removing of those things that are shaken, as of things that are made, that those things which cannot be shaken may remain. Wherefore we receiving a kingdom which cannot be moved, let us have grace, whereby we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear. For our God is a consuming fire.
Oh, so much good stuff. We're not going to get through all of it right now, but there's some good stuff. And what I find interesting is this concept here of shaking. How he says in verse 26, "Yet once more I shall shake not only the earth but also the heaven." And just to clarify, that word heaven there, that's talking about the sky, the universe. Basically, the earth and the universe is going to shake again at some point. And he ties this back, or the author ties this back and for previously when we were talking about God coming to Mount Sinai, the earth shook. Remember, there was earthquakes and there was lightning. All of that shook. But what's really interesting here is heaven, where God's dwelling, that does not shake. And so there's this interesting picture here, this difference between heaven and earth, where we're dwelling at now. It's going to shake again, but heaven is not going to be shaken. And I think that this is interesting. We talked a little bit last week about why did the earth shake. Maybe it was because the presence of God was so powerful. Maybe it was because of the curse that was put on it from man's rebellion. But what is interesting here is heaven doesn't shake. Why do you think it is that heaven doesn't shake?
And feel like 58. The low was 51.
Anybody have any thoughts on why maybe heaven doesn't shake?
Because it's outside of that earthly realm. It's in a different place. I don't know.
Well, it seems to
Heaven's
me,
not
I mean,
shaken.
could-
Maybe it's that this is at the end times when we're talking about the whole everything's going to change. We're going to have the new Jerusalem. We're going to have, we had the Big Bang. Now we're going to have the Big Shake.
I like that.
Where does it say heaven's not shaken?
Yeah, I
It
was
does
gonna-
say that in verse 28, therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us
Receiving-
have grace.
Okay, but above it's saying shake the heaven, but you were saying that one's a physical sky.
That's right. That refers to the universe.
Uh,
It
and
is
how
the
do you know
first
that?
heaven. That's just what the word means when I looked up the word.
Well, they use the same word.
Do they?
Yeah. I mean,
What do you mean they use
sorry,
the same
all I know
words?
is Latin.
Sorry.
It's the same word. Yeah, but I would
I,
assume in Greek it's the
I
same.
don't know. I just when I was looking it up, this was saying that this word refers to the heavens, the not the heavens plural, but the heaven, the first heaven, which is the sky and the universe, the
Right. So
shroud.
isn't both heaven and earth recreated? I mean,
The
I think I know there were comments that were made just
Sure.
before I was speaking that I actually envision this as a heaven and earth being shaken. And
Okay.
I do think it's end times for the most part. That
So then what do you think he means by
because they're
receiving a
being munged
kingdom?
together, in my opinion. There's a
I see.
transition. We could even go to your multiverse where now they both coexist, kind
Sure,
of things.
sure.
And he's shaking it out. It's like shaking the wheat and
Yeah.
the chaff, or winnowing it. It that's a sense that I get. But even in the question of whether heaven's included or not, I think ultimately what's recreated is unshakable. But
So
there's nothing
so
in here that really dictates a particular interpretation.
So, but this still applies to my question.
Mhm.
If we get if what happens after that is unshakable, why is it that that's unshakable, but our earth is shakable?
Because
Because I think,
it's perfection.
yeah, I would probably lean along those lines too, that it's meant to last forever after that. So it's unshakable in that sense.
If we look at the Bible as God making for himself a people, and this is the entire, all history is that process. And here is the culmination of it. I
I
think I'm
think this is
agreeing.
all. Yeah. This is all wonderful, right? Because and if we look at Exodus, when God comes to the earth and it shakes, I think that points out that not only is God so powerful, but I think it also points out that this earth that he comes down and condescends to meet with his people, it's not right. It's not perfect because
Yeah.
it's shaking in his presence. And I think that that's a really cool picture that he puts here, or that the author puts out and points out, is that when God meets with man, the earth shakes, but there's going to be a time when this new kingdom that we have, this new heaven, and you could be right, it could totally be this new heaven, new earth time, and that's actually one of the questions I have is when do you think this will happen? But regardless, it points out the fact that there's going to be a time when even the earth isn't going to shake when it's in the presence of God because it's the way God designed it to be.
Heaven doesn't shake because it's our foundation. And we're supposed to build our house on the rock and on solid ground because it's supposed to be firm and not move. And I don't think it gets any firmer or unmoving than God and his word. It does not change. It stays the same forever. And in so being, it does not shake or move.
Yeah,
I think
I
that
like it.
at one time, John, the earth didn't shake. The heavens didn't shake.
Yes.
After the entrance of sin, when sin entered the world, then the earth could shake. It was no longer perfect.
And if I agree with you, Dad, but I just want to point out that if this is true, then the rebellion that Adam started had much bigger consequences than what sometimes we even really think about. Because not only does it affect all of his descendants, but it actually impacted the universe. Because now the universe itself is somehow cursed because of this rebellion that Adam did. And so it's a much bigger deal than what we even realize. And I think part of this comes down to this verse 28, which we're running really low on time, and I really want to talk about 28 a lot more. So I'm just going to mention it. But it says, verse 28, therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us have grace by which we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear, for our God is a consuming fire. And I think there's a point here that the author is making about how amazingly powerful God is, that we get to approach him because he made us perfect. But if he didn't do that, there's no way we can't survive. He is a consuming fire. And so I love this point throughout all of this that we're reading here, even about the earth shaking, the fact that he even would consume the earth and the universe. That's how much of a consuming fire he is. Um, and the earth isn't right. And so he's got to take care of it. Anybody have any last thoughts? I really was
Just-
into this. I don't know if maybe this is too far out there, but I don't know what you guys think.
I think that just as we are going to be made perfect, so will the earth, the world, the universe will be made perfect. And I do believe, like Eric, that we are speaking the end times. This is at the end. This is what it's going to be like. We shall be perfect in God's eyes through Christ, and the world will be perfect, just like Dan said, just like before the fall.
I would add on top of that in the sense that, and this may be implied, but my kids have asked, it's a really interesting question. It's like, what could, when Satan gets destroyed and all this is settled, what prevents it from happening again if it was perfect before? And I think this goes to that length to say, this is the everlasting kingdom that eliminates that possibility. Because Satan was an angel and he rebelled. I mean, if he gets put away, there's a logical thing in the mind of at least children to say, well, what if another angel decides, starts corrupting? And I think this also speaks to the fact that this is it. I mean, Christ is going to reign, God's going to reign, and it's going to be forever and ever and ever. And nothing else is going to ever be shaken again from that standpoint. And that's a great comfort that God goes beyond what we can see or what we can even think of. It's a cool thing to it's a comfort, right? That it's not going to happen again. As far as
Rich, the question your children ask, I just think that is just, wow, how old are they? That's beautiful. I mean, that is a fantastic question.
Well,
And I
have a
like what
question
you
for
said in
you.
response. And I think if we have a chance to explore that as
yeah,
we
I
move
think
forward,
part of
it'd be
next week,
wonderful.
maybe we can talk about that a little bit. It'd be cool.
So the question I have we could talk about next week is, so in this time, do we no longer have free will?
Could you repeat that, Sean? I'm sorry.
And when all this happens, do we still have free will? Because that's what Satan had, was free will. That's what Adam and Eve had, was free will. So that begs the question that Rich's children brought up is, okay, the real question is, do we have free will when this all happens?
And do we have free will now?
Well, but Sean, I think what you're commenting is beautifully complementary to what Rich is saying as well. I mean, it'll be a wonderful thing to float.
I think, I mean, there's a difference between the perfect world before sin and the perfect world that's created after Christ redeemed us from sin. And I think we haven't explored that, and we're out of time, but I think that's worth exploring, because I think the answers probably lies somewhere in between there. That's really, really interesting.
If I might just simply add, it's where these readings in this study has brought me at the same time in the last week and a half or two. So
the way I look at it is we're going to be in a perfect world. We will have free will, but we will be in tune with we're in tune with God. We will be perfectly in relationship with God, and he will give us the desires of our heart. And our desires of the heart would be to please God. And so I think that's where the real answer is.
I want to push back on it, but
I'd like to switch the word complete from perfect as well, though. Perfect really means complete. And in this, I believe, in most cases here, but yes, next
time.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have to wait till next time. So that'll be our teaser for next week, and I'll try to study around more of this so we can talk about this more, because there's some interesting points that you guys bring up, and let's do that. Anybody want to pray for us and close us out?
Because I feel so unlike prayerful mind right now. I'm going to pray.
All right.
Lean into it.